I don't tell this story to make myself look good. I tell it because my youngest boy asked me last winter why I still take my hat off every time I pass the kitchen doorway of the old Holt place. The house I grew up in. The house my father built back up from almost nothing. The house where Willa Carn rode in out of a cold October morning and changed every single thing I thought I understood about my father and about what a man could still become after grief had finished with him. My name is Cody Holt. I was 19 years old in the autumn of 1884, old enough to be running the south pasture on my own, old enough to know that my father had not laughed once in the 3 years since my mother passed of a fever in July of 1881. Old enough to understand that a ranch, the size of ours, needed more hands than my father, myself, and my 12-year-old brother Dub could provide, and that the particular kind of help we needed was not the kind you hired off a labor board in Billings. My father's name was Reuben Holt, 44 years old that autumn, leather-faced and spare-worded, a man who communicated mostly through the angle of his hat brim and the set of his shoulders. He had been a good husband to my mother, and he had loved her in the stubborn, rock-solid way that certain men love quietly, completely, and in a way that left them with nothing to spend once that love was taken. He did not say this. He did not say much of anything those 3 years. He worked. He slept. He got back up and worked again. Dub and I orbited him like moons around a cold planet, giving him distance, watching him for signs of warmth, finding mostly the same steady chill. It was old Prentice Aldous, our neighbor to the east, a man who had lost his own wife 12 years prior and had since acquired a quality of calm practicality about such matters, who finally said the thing my father would not say himself. "Reuben," he said one evening at our supper table, helping himself to the salt pork Dub and I had cooked ourselves, which was bad enough that the salt pork would have benefited from an apology, "you need a woman in this house. Not for yourself, for these boys, and for the ranch." My father looked at him. "There's a notice board at the Billings post office," Prentice said, undisturbed. "School teachers, housekeepers, women looking to make a fresh start in the territory. Some of them are practical women looking for a practical arrangement. You don't have to love anyone, you just have to be decent." My father said nothing for a long time. He ate. He set his fork down. "Write to 3 of them," he said. "I'll read what they send back." That was how it started. I say this not to make it sound cold. It wasn't, not entirely. My father was a Montana rancher in 1884. He did not deal in sentiment. He dealt in what was real and what needed doing. And what needed doing, in the most honest reckoning, was that Dub was getting thin from bad cooking and my father was getting thin from grief, and the house had taken on the particular smell of a place where no one was paying attention to it. Something had to change. My father, being my father, proposed to change it the way he proposed to fix a broken fence line. Systematically, without fuss, and with exactly as much feeling as the task required. He was wrong about the feeling part, but he didn't know that yet. We sent 3 letters. 2 women wrote back, one from Denver who wanted to know how far from town we were, 31 miles, which ended the correspondence, and one from a schoolhouse in Laramie who asked for a full inventory of the livestock, which my father found presumptuous and did not answer. The 3rd letter came from a woman named Willa Carn. She was 31 years old, she wrote, a teacher of some years' experience who had spent the past 4 teaching at a school in the eastern part of the territory. The school had closed when the settlement around it collapsed after the railroad bypassed it. She was at present in Miles City, looking for a position. She enclosed a letter of character from the school superintendent and a 2nd letter from the Methodist minister of the town, both of which spoke well of her. She wrote in plain, even sentences that said what they meant and stopped when they'd said it. She asked for nothing in her letter. She stated what she could offer: housekeeping, teaching the boys, help with the accounts if the ranch kept any, some knowledge of livestock from her own father's operation in Iowa, and she asked what the arrangement would require of her. That was it. No embellishment. No bid for sympathy. My father read it twice, which was his equivalent of enthusiasm. "Right back," he said. "Tell her to come if she's willing." We told her to come, she came. I was in the south pasture when she rode in, so I did not see it, but Dub told me about it that evening, wide-eyed and talking faster than usual, and I've pieced the rest together in the 22 years since. She came alone, 31 miles from the Miles City stage line, on a sorrel mare she'd apparently bought or borrowed for the purpose, in the first real cold snap of October, wearing a dark wool coat and a hat that had seen better decades, with a single leather bag tied behind the saddle. My father was at the barn when she rode up. She stopped the mare at the yard gate, looked at him, and said Dub swore this was word for word, "Mr. Holt, I'm Willa Carn. I've come about the arrangement if it's still on offer." My father looked at her for a moment. "It is," he said. "Get down, I'll see to your horse." That was their introduction. I met her an hour later when I came in from the pasture. She was standing at the kitchen stove in her coat still. She hadn't taken it off yet, which I later understood was her way of not assuming, studying the state of the kitchen with the calm, level expression of a woman who had taught school long enough to have seen a great deal of disorder and had learned to address it without commentary. "You must be Cody," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Your brother tells me you've been doing the cooking." "Yes, ma'am." She looked at the stove. "Thank you for the effort," she said. "I'll take it from here." There was no pity in it, no amusement. Just a woman who had arrived, assessed what was in front of her, and begun. I liked her immediately, which surprised me. I had been prepared, in the territorial way of young men who have lost their mothers, to resent whoever came. You can't always predict what you'll feel until you're in it. My father came in from the barn 20 minutes later. He sat at the table. She served supper, a proper supper, from the same stores that had been in our kitchen for weeks, while Dub and I produced meals that qualified as food in only the most generous interpretation of the word. Nobody said much. My father looked at the food, looked at her once, and ate. Dub ate with the focused gratitude of a 12-year-old who had been living on salt pork and pride. After supper, Willa Carn washed the plates, dried them, and put them away in the right places. She'd apparently figured out where things went in an hour, which said something about her. Then she sat at the table across from my father with a plain piece of paper and a pen. "I think we should write down the terms," she said, "so there's no misunderstanding." My father looked at her. "All right." They wrote it down. She had her room, the one off the back of the house that had been used for storage. She would keep the house, manage the kitchen, teach Dub his lessons 3 mornings a week, and assist with the accounts. She would be treated with respect. She would have 1 day in a fortnight to herself. In exchange, she had her board, a small wage paid monthly, and a roof. The question of the marriage, which made the arrangement proper in the eyes of the territory and the territory's people, was settled with the same plainness. "I understand there would be a ceremony," she said. "I'd want it small and I'd want it honest. I'm not coming here under any pretense, and I'd rather neither of us did." "Agreed," my father said. "And I'd want it understood that this is a working arrangement. I'm not expecting—" She paused, choosing words with the care of a woman who taught language for a living, "more than that. And I won't be offering more than that. Not at the start." My father nodded slowly. "Same," he said. "Good," she said. "Then we understand each other." They were married 3 days later in Harrow Basin's one-room church by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through, with myself and Dub and old Prentice Aldous as the only witnesses. It took 11 minutes. Willa wore her good dress, which was dark blue wool and entirely respectable. My father wore his town coat. Nobody cried. Afterward, Prentice shook my father's hand and tipped his hat to Willa, and she thanked him by name, which she'd already learned, which was the kind of thing she did. We rode back to the ranch. She went to the kitchen. My father went to the barn. Dub looked at me. "Is that it?" he said. "That's it," I said. It wasn't, of course. But none of us knew that yet. The first month was polite and careful, like two people sharing a narrow trail. She learned the ranch the way she learned everything, steadily, without fuss, asking the right questions and then not asking again. She learned which horses were which, and which of them would test her and which were honest. She learned where the fence line ran soft in the northwest corner, and which of our two wells was the one you didn't trust after a heavy rain. She learned that Dub would eat anything set in front of him as long as it was warm, and that I took my coffee without sugar, and that my father took his without anything, and that he liked it before he spoke a word in the morning and not 1 second after he'd sat down. She learned my father the way you learn a piece of ground you're going to work, carefully, without forcing it, paying attention to where it gave and where it held firm. I watched all of this. I was 19, and I had nothing to compare it to, so I watched it the way a young man watches a thing he doesn't yet have words for. My father, for his part, was correct. I want to be exact about this because it would be easy to say he was warm or that he thawed right away, and neither of those things would be true. He was not warm. He was correct. He said please and thank you, which he had always done. He answered her questions directly. He made no demands on her beyond the terms of the arrangement. He treated her, in those first weeks, the way an honest man treats a good employee, with respect and appropriate distance. But there were things I noticed, because I was his son and I had been watching him for 19 years and I knew the grammar of him. He began to come to supper on time. He had been late those 3 years, more often than not to be difficult, just because the barn and the work had ceased to have competition. He came on time now. He noticed when she had done something to a room and said nothing, but he noticed, you could see it in the way his eye moved. He stopped leaving his tools on the kitchen table, which he had been doing since my mother passed, which drove her crazy, and which I did not realize until later that he had also stopped for her. Small things. The grammar of a man who was paying attention, even if he didn't know it yet. The blizzard came in the second week of November, which was early even for Montana. We'd seen the sky building for 2 days, that particular flat gray that means the temperature is about to fall off a cliff, and my father and I had spent those 2 days moving cattle to the lower shelter, and bringing in wood and making the barn as tight as we could. Willa had spent those same 2 days laying in stores and checking the root cellar and filling every vessel we had with water, because she'd grown up in Iowa, and she knew what a real winter looked like. It hit on a Wednesday night, and it hit hard. By morning, there was 4 feet against the barn door, and the wind was running 40 miles an hour, and the temperature had dropped to the kind of number that kills anything that isn't sheltered. We lost 2 calves before we got to them. My father and I worked the barn for 6 hours, moving animals and checking for injuries and making sure the structure was holding. Willa kept the house. Dub tried to help in the barn until my father sent him back inside, which Dub accepted because he was 12 and also because the cold was serious. It was in the 3rd hour of that barn work, at around what I judged to be 8 in the morning, that I went back to the house for a rope we'd run out of and found Willa outside in the snow. She had put on my father's spare barn coat over her own coat, and she was at the wood stack in the lee of the house, hauling wood. The temperature was brutal. She was methodical. She did not look like a woman in distress. She looked like a woman doing arithmetic. "I've got the kitchen fire high enough," she said when she saw me, "but we'll run short of the close in wood by afternoon if someone doesn't move it nearer. Where do you keep the sled?" I showed her. She loaded the sled herself while I got the rope. When I went back to the barn, she was still at it. My father came in from the north side of the barn at midday and found the wood stacked tight and neat right outside the house door, enough for 3 days, moved and stacked in a blizzard. He looked at it. He looked at me. "She did that," I said. He didn't say anything. He went inside. I followed him. She had soup on, real soup, not the thin approximation of soup that Dub and I had managed that fall. And she was at the table with the account ledger open, working figures by lantern light, because the sky had gone dark as dusk even though it was noon. My father sat down, he looked at the soup, he looked at the ledger. "We're short on the note to the Billings Bank," she said without looking up. "By $40, but if you sell the 2 gray steers in February instead of March, the price should cover it with room." He looked at her. "I found the ledger in the desk," she said. "I hope you don't mind. I used to keep my father's books. If you'd prefer I didn't." "No," he said. "That's no, I don't mind." She looked up at him then, and there was something in the exchange, the careful way she watched to see if she had overstepped, the way he answered a half-beat slower than usual, that I have thought about in the 22 years since. Two people beginning, without meaning to see each other as something other than what they'd agreed to. I ate my soup. I didn't say anything. I was 19, but I wasn't oblivious. Dub got sick in December. Nothing dangerous, a chest cold that turned heavy and settled in and kept him in bed for 11 days. The doctor was in Harrow Basin, 12 miles in the best weather, and in December on the back of that blizzard, 12 miles was not a casual proposition. Willa handled it. She had medicines in her bag she'd come provisioned for a frontier winter, which told you something about how she'd thought through the whole venture, and she knew what to do with a chest cold. She sat with him. She read to him, which she'd been doing for his lessons anyway, but now she read to him for hours at a stretch. Not school things, but stories, adventure things, the kind of thing a 12-year-old boy who's stuck in bed and miserable needs. My father would come to the doorway of Dub's room in the evenings. He'd stand there and look at his son and at the woman reading to him, and he'd stand there for a moment and then leave again. He did this for several nights running. He did not think I was watching. I was always watching. On the 7th night, he did not leave. He came to the doorway and stood there, and after a moment he came in and sat in the chair on the other side of the bed. Willa was mid-chapter, some adventure about a sea voyage, I don't recall the title. She glanced at my father and did not stop. She just read. He sat. Dub lay between them, half asleep already, and she read until his breathing evened and he was fully under. She closed the book. She looked at my father. "He'll be all right," she said quietly. "Another 4 or 5 days and it'll break." "I know," my father said. And then, after a pause that contained several things he wasn't saying, "Thank you." "He's a good boy," she said. "He asks the best questions." My father looked at his sleeping son for a moment. "His mother used to say that," he said. It was the first time I had heard him speak of my mother to anyone, since the funeral. I was in the hallway. I felt the words like a hand on the sternum. Willa didn't flinch from it, didn't rush to fill the space it made. "She sounds like she knew him well," she said. "She did," my father said, and then he got up and went to bed. But the next night he came and sat again. And the night after. By the time Dub was well and back at the table, my father had developed a habit of sitting by his sons in the evenings, something he had not done, now I thought of it, since before my mother got sick. January was cold and clear and long. There is a quality to a Montana January that I don't have exact words for. The light is thin and white, and the cold is absolute, and the world contracts to the distance between the house and the barn and back. You spend a great deal of time indoors with whoever you've decided to spend the winter with, and that proximity either confirms what you already knew about each other or changes it. It changed things. Willa had her place at the table. She had her routines up first, fire built before anyone else stirred, the kitchen organized and running by the time my father came in from the first barn check. She had her way with Dub's lessons and her way with the accounts and her way with the house. She had, in short, stopped being a presence we were adjusting to and become part of the furniture of our days, which sounds dismissive and is meant to be the highest compliment I know how to pay, because the furniture of your days is the thing your life is actually built on. My father began talking to her at supper. Not much at first, a sentence, a question about the accounts, a mention of the cattle. but the sentences got longer and the questions stopped being only about the ranch. He asked her once, out of what seemed like genuine curiosity, where she had grown up and what her father's operation had run to. She told him a small mixed farm in Iowa, her father a particular man with high standards and not enough help, herself the eldest of four, and the one most likely to be found in the barn when she was supposed to be in the kitchen. He listened. He asked a follow-up question. I watched my brother's face across the table, because Dub was 12 and not yet practiced at concealing his expressions. And his expression was the one a person wears when they've been cold for a long time and something warm is starting. There was an evening in late January. It must have been the 25th or 6th, because the temperature had dipped hard again, and we'd been inside most of 2 days. When the three of us were at the table after supper and Willa was grading the sums she'd had Dub work that week, and my father said, with no particular preamble, "Did you always want to teach?" She looked up. "No," she said. "I wanted to run a horse operation, but a woman alone in Iowa in 1870 didn't have many paths to that, and teaching was the one that kept me outdoors part of the time and let me save money." My father was quiet for a moment. "You saved enough to come out here." "I saved enough to make a choice," she said. "That was all I was after." My father looked at his coffee cup. "That's a particular thing to be after," he said. "Yes," she said, "it is." They were quiet together after that in a way that was different from the quiet of the first month. The first month's quiet had been careful, two people not stepping on each other's ground. This quiet was comfortable, and comfort, I've learned, is not a small thing. Comfort is what you build when you trust the ground you're standing on. February thawed enough to let us move around, and my father sold the gray steers at the February market in Harrow Basin and cleared the banknote with $22 to spare, which was Willa's arithmetic, and which my father mentioned to her when he came home, handing her the cleared receipt to put in the ledger. "You were $4 over," he said, "not a complaint. Something closer to appreciation." "The February price was up from last year," she said. "I guessed conservative." "You can drop the conservative part next time," he said. "Your instinct's good." She looked at him. He said it plainly, the way he said everything, but she heard it for what it was, and so did I. My father did not hand out that kind of remark idly. She put the receipt in the ledger and said thank you, and that was all, but she was careful not to look up until the moment had settled, and I thought that was the right call. March came in with mud and the smell of running water and the cattle beginning to move again, and the whole ranch exhaled the way it does when the worst of the winter has passed and the work shifts from surviving to building. I found them at the corral fence one evening in the first week of March. They were watching the horses run the paddock in the last of the daylight, not talking, my father with his arms on the top rail and his eyes on the horses, Willa 2 feet to his right in the same posture. The gray mare that had been his since before I could remember was running the far end of the paddock, and my father tracked her the way he tracked things he was responsible for and fond of. After a while Willa said, "She's the one you trust." "She is," he said. "She moves like she knows it." He looked at the mare. "I got her the same year I got the ranch," he said. 19 years ago. She was green and she didn't trust me worth a damn for the first 8 months. He paused. She came around. Willa was quiet for a moment. 8 months is patient, she said. "Some things are worth the patience," he said. I was behind them, coming from the barn, and I stopped where I was and did not announce myself, because a man knows when he's in the middle of something that is not for him to interrupt. I stood there until they moved apart and the moment passed, and then I made some noise coming through the gate, and nobody said anything about any of it. The spring brought a letter from the school board in Billings. Willa showed it to my father at the breakfast table one morning in late March, setting it beside his coffee cup without preamble. A position had opened at a school in Billings, a proper town school, a good posting. The superintendent had heard her name from the Miles City superintendent, who had evidently thought highly of her before the school there closed. Would she be interested? My father read it, he set it down, he looked at his coffee. "It's a good opportunity," Willa said. She had her hands around her own cup and her voice was entirely level. "I thought you should see it." "When do they need an answer?" he said. 3 weeks. He nodded once and got up and went to the barn. I sat at the table, Dub sat across from me. Willa looked at the letter. "Are you going?" Dub said. He was 13 by then and he'd stopped working hard at hiding what he thought about things. "I don't know yet," she said. "Pa doesn't want you to go," Dub said. Willa looked at him. "Your father hasn't said anything about it," she said. "Pa doesn't say things," Dub said. "He does things. He's been fixing the back fence every night for a week. That's the fence outside your window." Willa was quiet for a moment. She looked at the letter again. I did not say anything, because I was not 12, and I was aware that some information needs to stay on the table a while before anyone does anything with it. My father spent those 3 weeks the way my father spent every difficult thing in motion. He repaired every fence line on the property, rebuilt the lean-to on the north end of the barn, and replaced the 2 kitchen windows that had been drafty all winter. He did not say a word about the letter. On the 20th day, 2 days before Willa's answer was due, I came in from the south pasture at dusk and found them in the kitchen. She was at the stove. He was at the table, which was where he often was in the evenings now. The lamp was lit. The room smelled like the beef stew she'd been slow cooking since morning. He said without looking up from the table, "I don't want you to go." She had her back to him. She did not turn right away. "Reuben," she said. It was the first time I had heard her use his name without the mister. "You should say that plainly if you mean it plainly." He was quiet for a moment. "I mean it plainly," he said. She turned then. She looked at him for a long time, the way she looked at things she was deciding. "I came here for a practical arrangement," she said. "I want to be sure you're not asking me to stay because of the ranch." "The ranch can get a housekeeper," he said. "I'm not asking you to stay for the ranch." Another silence. The lamp flickered once. "I need to write to the school board tonight," she said. "I know," he said. "I've got paper." She almost smiled at that, the way my father solved things, the pure practicality of it, which was by then a thing she seemed to find endearing rather than blunt. "All right," she said. "Then let me say my piece. I came here willing. I've stayed willing. That's not something I'd do for a roof over my head. I know how to find a roof. I stayed because this place has become mine too, in the way places do when you've put yourself into them. And because your sons are," she stopped, reset. "Because Dub and Cody matter to me. And because," she looked at him directly, "you are not the man you showed me in October. And the man you've become since is someone I would choose, if I had the choosing." My father looked at her for a long time. "You have the choosing," he said. "You've always had the choosing. That was the only thing I knew to be sure of about any of this." I was in the doorway. Neither of them knew it. She crossed the kitchen and held out her hand, not a romantic gesture, something more fundamental than that, something between 2 people who have come to each other honestly and want it done honestly now too. He took her hand. He held it the way he held the gray mare's lead rope when she was green, and didn't trust him, steady, no grip, just there. "I'll write to the school board," she said. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "I have opinions about the North Pasture rotation that you're not going to like." He did not smile. My father was not a man who smiled easily, but something in his face moved, and in 19 years of watching him I had learned that the movement was the thing. The smile was downstream of it. I backed out of the doorway and went to the barn and let the moment be theirs. They had a second ceremony in April. The first one had been the arrangement. Honest, plain, 11 minutes, nobody crying. This one was still small, the same circuit preacher, old Prentice, myself, Dub, and Willa's one friend in the territory, A woman named Ruth Alderman who had ridden 15 miles from the Alderman spread to be there, but it was not an arrangement. It was a choosing. My father wore his good town coat. Willa wore the dark blue wool dress again, but she had put a spray of the early prairie flowers, the yellow ones that come up stubborn through the last of the snow, in her hat, which she must have arranged herself that morning, and which was the kind of quiet particular thing she did that you noticed if you were paying attention. The preacher said the words. My father said his slowly, the way he said anything important, as if he was making sure each word was load-bearing before he set the next one down. Willa said hers steadily, looking at him. At the part where the preacher said he could kiss his bride, my father leaned forward and kissed her on the cheek, which was appropriate to the company and to his character, and which Willa received with a composure that I recognized as the same composure she'd ridden 31 miles in October to show a man who had posted a notice because he didn't know what else to do. Prentice shook my father's hand after. About time, he said. 6 months, my father said. That's fast for you, Prentice said. My father almost smiled again, 2 times in 1 week. I was taking inventory. We had a meal back at the ranch, Ruth Alderman and Prentice and the 5 of us around the table, and it was the loudest supper the Holt Ranch had seen in, well, since my mother. Dub told the story of the blizzard with generous embellishments. Willa corrected the embellishments without missing a beat, which made Dub laugh, which made Prentice laugh, and somewhere in the middle of that, my father looked down the table at his sons and his new wife, and he looked like a man who had come back from somewhere far away and found, against all expectation, that there was still a table to come back to. I watched him for a moment. Then I picked up my fork and let the meal be what it was. That is the story. Or most of it. The rest is 37 years of cattle prices and hard winters, and the boys my father never expected, and the school Willa eventually helped start in Harrow Basin, which has been running for 19 years now, and which she nominally retired from at 60 and in practice still manages, because Willa Holt and retirement have a complicated relationship. My father died in the winter of 1907. He was 67 and he went quietly, which was how he did everything, and which I think was what he would have wanted. Willa was with him. She held his hand through the last of it, the same as the first time she held it, steady, no grip, just there. She is still at the ranch. She is 62 now, and she still rides out to the south pasture twice a week, and she still knows exactly what the accounts look like, and exactly which fence lines need attention, and exactly when to sell the steers to get the best February price. I still take my hat off at the kitchen doorway. My youngest boy asked me why last winter the way I said. I told him, because a woman rode 31 miles alone through an October cold snap to answer a widower's notice, and she did it with her eyes open and her terms plain and her judgment about where she was willing to put herself, and she was right about all of it. And because a man who had turned to stone found out, across one Montana winter, that stone is not the only thing you can be, that grit and patience and the willingness to be honest about what you need can build something as solid as anything you've lost, and warmer. My boy is 17. He looked at me for a moment. That's a good reason, he said. It's the only reason, I said. Go see if your grandmother needs the wood brought in. He went. The kitchen smelled like beef stew. I stood in the doorway a moment longer with my hat in my hand, the way I always do, and then I went in.